Hi, I'm your host, Dr. Lori, and welcome to Universally Unique, exploring the neurodiverse world of the extraordinary. This podcast fosters curiosity and understanding about neurodiversity while empowering individuals with tools for acceptance and inclusion in classrooms, the workplace, and communities. Featuring shared stories of neurodiverse life experiences, it sheds light on navigating a world not designed for diversity. Universally Unique starts now. Hi, this is Dr. Lori. Welcome to Universally Unique. My guest today is Dr. Ethan Margolis, and he is going to take us through his journey as an individual who is neurodiverse and probably a little mixed in with some of his professional experiences that I think kind of bounced off of that. But before we get started, we're going to take 3 box breaths. I'll count us through those, and then we'll hear Ethan's story. So we'll start, we'll breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, hold for 4, and start again. So breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, and a nice sigh at the end. Okay. All right. So, Dr. Margolis, is it okay if I call you Ethan?
I prefer that, yes. Okay.
So if you would maybe give us a little overview of your journey as an individual who is neurodiverse. I think pieces of it are probably shorter and longer than others, but if you would take us through kind of when you got a diagnosis, how that worked out, and where that's kind of brought you to.
Sure. First things first, I began my school career in a small private elementary school, K-8. It was called Buckingham Friends School. So the whole school had, my graduating class from 8th grade had 15 students in it. It was one of those places where we learned Latin, we learned Greek, we learned French. We had a whole day. Thursdays were spent cleaning the property. It was when we did science classes, we went down to the creek. When we wanted geography, there was always somebody in the community who had lived in a particular place or knew somebody in a particular place, and they would come in and we would learn through them. So it was a lot of hands-on exploration. Every single morning started out with a journaling exercise. And it was what we had done the previous day, what we'd learned from it, and what our goals were for today. Wow. So that was a unique experience because I didn't realize that I had anything that was different than anybody else, because the whole place was geared around the idea that everybody was a unique thinker and learner. And there was no rote memory involved in the whole process. It was all a lot of questions, and so everything always started out with a question, and everything usually went from there. So that was, I spent my first 8 years in school there, and I knew everybody in the school, and everybody knew me because it was a small school. When I reached high school age, my parents were starting to save for my daughter. My sister was going off to college. I was going to be next in a few years, and then my brother. So they decided it was time for me to go to public school. So I went from a school where there were 15 kids in my graduating class to a regional high school where there were 300 kids in my freshman class.
It's a bit of a shock.
It was to say it was a culture shock was the understatement of the week. It was, I mean, people were moving from, we didn't move from, we moved when I was in elementary school, we moved to different buildings where things were going on, but we didn't really change classes in the formal sense of changing classes. Suddenly I was changing classes. I was using a locker. I was doing stuff that I had never done before. And I didn't get it. I didn't understand the culture. I didn't understand the process. I suddenly went from a place where everything started out with, every morning started out with journaling. Every day ended up with journaling, to a place where it was all rote memory. So every single teacher would ask, you'd have to memorize all these things. I'd never done that because in the past, if it didn't make connections, we didn't learn it.
Yeah.
So everything was designed to make connections. And so I would ask questions like, why are we learning this? And they would say, you've got a problem.
Yeah,
or they would,
generally teachers don't like students like that.
yeah, it was so very, and why did you just fail this test? Aren't you studying? I didn't know how to study because I'd never had to study.
Yeah.
I just learned.
Yeah.
So it was a unique experience in the sense that, so my freshman year, my mother was absolutely beside herself. She didn't know what to do. So she took me and they evaluated me and they decided I had ADHD, which I knew I had ADD or ADHD most of my life because I was one of those people who just never sat anywhere, always was moving and finding things, and thought in a different way than most people did. And I didn't realize that till I got to high school, and I would see connections that other people didn't see, and they would question why I'd made that connection, and it wasn't in the book, so therefore it wasn't right. So it took a while for me to realize that, I mean, 4 years of high school were probably the most stressful time in my life. I mean, it's stressful for any kid to go through puberty and go through all that. For me, it was doubly stressful because I just didn't figure it all out. I finally started getting it like my senior year. I would get things like, well, he did well in the test, but he hasn't turned in any homework. Well, because I didn't see any sense in doing the homework because I already understood what was going on. So why should I be doing something that I didn't need to do? So I would have arguments with the teacher, and they would explain to me that that's the way it worked here, that you do your homework, and homework is part of your grade. And I would ask, why is it part of my grade if you're going to evaluate me on a test? Just let me learn the stuff, and I'll come back and tell you. So I was probably going to spend another year as a senior, except I went in. My mother came in, and she had a conversation with my physics teacher, who was going to fail me. And she said, "What happens he learns differently than other people do? What happens if you give him the book, let him go home, and not turn in your homework and take the test? If he takes the test and he fails it, then you can fail him. If he takes a test and he passes it, then you'll agree to give him a passing grade." And he said, "There's no way and whatever that he's going to pass it. Sure, why not? What I got to lose?" So I went home. I took the book. I read it. I came back. I got the second highest grade on the test. This was the final. So he had to give me. He said, "Well, I'm going to give you a D." And I said, "Wait a minute. Everybody else who got this grade got an A. How come I'm getting a D?" "Well, you never turned in any homework." I said, "You already." So I said, he said, you can't possibly get an A. I said, "But I passed the test." "And that's how you said you determined it," because it was I was in New Jersey, so there weren't Regents tests. But it was a state test. So I said I did really well on it, and he said, so we negotiated to a B. So I graduated from high school anyway, and I always thought I
Thank
was dumb.
heavens. But your mother
Because
was so smart, though,
my
to
mother
understand that.
was not an was how do I describe her? She was not a nurturing individual, but she was a tiger mother for her kids. So she went to bat for all of her kids, but don't always expect that you're going to get a kind word out of her, but you're going to get support where you need it. And both of my parents were that way. I mean, they were they loved their children, but they didn't know it wasn't a huggy relationship. It was you can do it. And my father was a farmer. So, I mean, it
Yeah.
was just like, you do the stuff you need to do and you get it done, you get the job done. So if somebody's showing up at 10 o'clock, you're there at 9:42. So there's no question. So there were skills that he gave me that really helped me because um, normally what I would do is wait till the last minute and screw around with it and then get it done. Um, that only works a little bit of the time. It didn't work. And I didn't realize it until I went to college. So I went off to
Yeah.
college. I went to the University of Pittsburgh for my freshman year, and I just about failed out. And why I did was because they said you don't have to go to class. So I didn't go to class. They said you can read this stuff and you can come and take the test. I did that. And it didn't work for me because I did need to be in class and I didn't realize it. So while I was there, I realized first thing that I was going in to be an engineer, and there's no way in God's green earth I was going to be an engineer. But I liked the stuff and I thought, okay, this is interesting. I can do this. And I came away realizing that wasn't me. So I transferred schools. I went to Fairleigh Dickinson, which is in New Jersey, and I became a triple major. I had Latin American studies, history, and hotel and restaurant management.
It's quite a combo.
Well, they didn't quite know what to do with it because it was so diverse. But I figured I sat down. College was a lot different. I mean, I went out of high school thinking I was a total idiot. I'll be honest. I did because I didn't get it. I didn't get the grades. I didn't know the answers in class because they wanted me to stand up and say, 1492, 30,
Yeah.
It didn't make any sense to me, so I didn't bother learning it. I go to college and I'm sitting in classes and it's really interesting. These guys know a lot about this stuff and they're saying, well, you know what? If you read the footnotes on the bottom, then you can even get more information. And I went, holy,
Ah.
point blank.
Yeah.
And it's like I would go off on these horrendous tangents and I'd go to class and somebody would say, something about Galileo. And I'd say, well, it's not quite there. If you read the footnotes, and I would take books out. It was like, oh my God, somebody opened up a whole world to me that I didn't know existed. So I loved college. I absolutely loved it. I loved it because I picked my classes. I had one of those screwy majors. I go off to the work world and I realize as I'm graduating that first thing I don't want to, most of the people who are like, history, Latin American, were going into law school or become in the foreign service. That wasn't of interest to me. So, and I had this program in, hotel and restaurant management, and I'd worked in restaurants through college. So I said, I think I want to go do that. So I got a job working for ARA Food Services, which is a large food service corporation. And they ran hotels and programs throughout the whole world. So I went to work for them and I worked in Venezuela in Macuto. And they sent us there because the hotel had been owned by Hilton originally, and the country had nationalized it, and suddenly busboys became managers and they ran it right into the ground.
Oh,
So
dear.
they went out and looked for bids. So ARA said, sure, we'll come and run the hotel. We want all the money up front and we'll send our team. Well, our team was 8 young guys and ladies who this was our first job. So we went there and we were there supposedly to help to train them so that they could run the thing themselves. Well, they weren't really interested in training. They were interested in other stuff. So we ended up having to run the hotel. So I spent a year there living in the hotel, not seeing a heck of a lot of Venezuela or Colombia. I saw a little bit on some breaks, but basically I just worked there and put the money aside because I was not spending any money because I wasn't going anywhere and I was living in a hotel for free and eating for free.
Yeah.
So after a year of that, the contract was ready to end. It had not worked out well. The company was ready to the contract ran out. They were having trouble collecting the rest of their money from the government. And they said, come on home. We'll reassign you all. And I came home. Sat down, had a conversation with my father. And I said, I effing hate this job. I have no life. A lot of the people I'm working with are total jerks. Um, it's not something I want to do for the rest of my life. He said, well, you've got a lot of money because you've been banking it. You haven't done anything with it. Take some time off and figure out what you want to do. At the time, I had a girlfriend who was a special ed teacher teaching at the time. They called them retarded individuals. No, we don't use that term
Fortunately,
anymore.
we don't use that word anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I went into work with her because I had plenty of time. I was hanging out. And I really loved it. I loved working with the kids. I loved explaining to the kids how things work. I said, this is something I think I want to do. So I got a job. Um, I did that for, I don't know, about 2 or 3 months. And I got a job working, teaching special education, running a program. They called it resource room, but it was not a resource room. It was basically a self-contained program for high school students in Wildwood, New Jersey. Now, Wildwood in the winter is not, we used to call it Deadwood. It's not a place you really want to spend time, but it was a great learning experience for me because number one, I hadn't gotten through I hadn't taken any coursework yet. They hired me because I was big and the kids were emotionally disturbed. So, and I said, I really want to do this and I want to do it right. So I went back to school, went nights, and the state of New Jersey at the time, they were paying for you to go and get certified because they really needed special ed teachers.
Yeah.
So I went and got certified. At the end of the year, I realized that there's something I really wanted to do, and I moved to a different job. That led to a whole bunch of I think I was in middle school job, and I was working with kids who had learning issues. In those days, they weren't as well defined as they are now, but so it was a conglomeration of everybody under the sun. It was kids who had social emotional problems. It was kids who had severe learning issues. It was kids who had limited capability to learn specific tasks. So it was all that stuff thrown into one place, but it was really fun and it was exciting. So that led to me saying, you know what, I want to go and do more. And so I went on and went to graduate school. And I went to the University of Florida in Gainesville. While I was in Florida, there were so many different opportunities to learn and grow. So it led to a lot of other things. I was in a program for training special ed administrators and also learning disabilities at the time. So it was a good program. I went from there. When I completed my first internship, which was at the Alachua County, because in Florida, all of the school systems are county based. So it was the Alachua County school system, and I worked with the director of special ed at the time. And that was cool, but it didn't require a lot of my thought process. It required a lot of just make sure you cross all the T's and dot all the I's.
That's the part that, I mean, you can do that, but that's not the part that
it
you
wasn't
like.
something I learned how to do that, but I never liked it. So I said, this is not something I want to do. So I went back and met with Chuck Fortno, who was my advisor at the time. And he had worked for the federal government for a lot of years and came to Florida. And he got me a job in the Department of Education. So I went to Washington to work in a program called Aid to the States. And what Aid to the States was, it was a program to help states, not school districts, but states implement PL 94-142, which was prior to IDEA and prior to the special ed laws. So I learned a lot there.
I'm going to interject for just a second for folks who are not coming from the same background that Ethan and I do. Those are the original laws that got students with disabilities a guaranteed public school education.
Right. And my job really, when I first began it, my job was basically, I was on the phone calling and talking to parents and people who were trying to figure out how to manipulate the system or work through the system. I would say manipulate, but more negotiate the system. And I heard horrendous stories. I heard stories about kids literally being locked, handcuffed to all radiators and locked in rooms. And I mean, the schools didn't know what to do with the kids, so they were doing everything they could in rubber rooms, the whole routine. But it was a real eye-opener. I realized how much that particular program was needed, and it gave me an opportunity. I watched Tom Urban, who was the director and had been the original author, along with with Noel, who was a state senator from Connecticut,
Yep.
Laker. And so I had a chance to talk to all those people who were involved in that and watch it. Um, and it was just amazing. It was amazing to watch the implement. It was amazing to watch people get involved in things that they always knew were wrong but didn't know how to fix. This provided them the opportunity. And Jimmy Carter was, I mean, I've heard lots of nasty things about him as a president, but I have to say he was probably one of the smartest, nicest people I ever met. And while I was there, I mean, he would come through ever regularly and just talk to us and say, ask us how it was going and what we needed to do differently. So it was a real eye opener for me. So
Yeah.
I was there for 2 years, a half a year as an intern, and then I spent a year and a half providing services for students who were in U.S. protectorates and helping and working with the Department Defense in their schools, helping them implement it. So it was a great job, but it was a lot of traveling, and it was real. I was not making any connections I was making. It was an amazing job, but it wasn't something I knew I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And most people who went to there didn't stay for 400 years.
Well, it's a job for a single person, a person who doesn't really want to settle
Yeah,
down,
well, and I was
doesn't want to
young.
get to know people, doesn't want to have
No, I think
things.
there were family people there, but their families were all in DC, and they made it work. And plus, I met my wife at the time too, which sort of
Yeah.
added to the
So,
excitement.
but it reminds us though how immensely disenfranchised individuals with disabilities were. You know, people didn't know what to do. Sometimes people were afraid of these folks, but the reality was is they were treated horrifically,
Yeah,
and in ways that were so massively, incredibly inhumane. Um,
yeah,
and one of my current worries, quite honestly, at this point, is that we may be going backwards instead of forwards in the services that we have the potential to provide. Hopefully, there are enough people who have been on the front lines doing the work, who understand how this needs to happen, that we're not going to reverse ourselves back to
yeah,
something
yeah.
else.
I agree with you, and I think it's hard, but there's some things I learned along the process, and for that was, I mean, I watched deinstitutionalization, which never worked out correctly, but which basically, just for people who don't know, it was really removing, for many years, people with severe disabilities were housed in large institutional settings. And um, they thought that, I mean, they had workshops and they had things going on, but they thought that was the best method. And we realized it was not the best method, but it took a lot of work to figure that all out. But so I left there and I went to work as a director of special education. And I did that in 4 different districts. I was an assistant to the superintendent. I was an assistant superintendent. I was a director. I did that for many years and worked in Stanford for the end of my career. Prior to that, it had been Edgemont, which is Scarsdale in New York, and a lot of other places, but East Brunswick, New Jersey, a whole bunch of places. But and that was cool. I mean, it was because I was a problem solver and I love problem solving, and I don't work real well for other people. That's no secret. So I always had bosses. In fact, when I would do an interview, I would interview because they were looking for people with specific skill sets, and I had that skill set. I would interview them as well and say, this is not going to work. What he wants me to do, I can't do.
Yeah.
And it took some hard learning to do. I had a boss, a superintendent who I absolutely truly loved. He was the smartest, kindest person you ever met when I worked in Edgemont. And he retired for a lot of different reasons. And the new person who came in was none of those things. And he and I had a major discussion because he saw his role as bypassing a system that had a specific purpose. Kids were identified for a reason. They weren't identified so they could get extra time on it, taking a college board test. Kids who needed services shouldn't be denied those services. And we need to not always be looking at the bottom line. We need to always look at the bottom line, but we need to look at the bottom line and how do we best service people, and not how do we save a few bucks here or a few bucks there so we can put it towards the football program.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's,
We're getting a little closer to the end of our
yeah,
time together, but I think one of the things that I find that people don't understand is that the money you spend educating students that have a variety of different disabilities when they're in K to 12 situations is money well spent, because when they become adults, whether they are people who continue to need assistance or whether they don't need assistance, they will always need less than what they would need if we don't give them what they need K to 12.
totally. Yeah, I
And
won't go on for
yeah,
that, but you're right.
and I think that's a piece that people sometimes are forgetting. I mean, I spent a good portion of my career, except for the time that I was teaching at the university, which I was still doing some of this stuff anyways, with adults that have disabilities. People will be adults with disabilities potentially significantly longer than they will be school age folks. But if we don't do the right thing by them school age, as adults, they will be very expensive.
Yeah,
And
there's no question about that. Plus,
yeah.
it's they have a better quality of life, and the people around them have a better quality of life. So the
Oh yeah. Yeah.
to not
Families,
beat this thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody, everybody benefits from it, you know.
You have
So,
any other questions you want to ask me
well, I
before?
do have one question, and this is partially biased because you and I know each other, but you have a little bit of a superpower, you know, a sort of a contextual strength. I used to get emails at I don't know what godly hour of the day it was. Here's 5 articles I read, and I thought you might be interested in them.
Okay.
But in 5 minutes, I think you read those 5 articles. You have an incredible capacity for absorbing a large amount of information in a really short period of time and synthesizing it to something that's useful.
I
So, do
think
you think that's part of your ADHD?
totally. I think it's two things. I think it was my training when I was little, meaning in
Hmm.
elementary school, and secondly is it's stuff interests me. So then I read it, and then I say, "Oh my gosh, Lori's interested in this," and she was talking to me about this. And then here's another article I just see here that. So yeah, to answer your question, it's definitely part of my. I wouldn't say it's a disability. I'd say part of my makeup.
Yeah, no,
So
I
yeah,
think
yeah. I'm not sure it's a superpower. Sometimes
it's a
it's a pain
strength,
in the
though. It's definitely a strength.
pain in the butt to people around me sometimes because I'm moving in places that they aren't there yet. And that was one thing I really had to learn when I went into doing administration in public schools was to slow down and take a deep breath and realize that not everybody was going to be where I was going to be, and how do I help to bring them along? Because a lot of times once you bring them along, they add stuff to it. You know, people used to joke about the fact that I was a big idea person and not great on details. I mean, I knew how to do details thanks to my father, because you don't grow up on a farm and learn not to do details. But I always hired people or have brought people along with me who were detail oriented people,
Mhm.
because they're very important. They're the people that
Yeah.
make it happen. And that's not something I do as well. I mean, I bless my wife. I always say my children were raised by a single parent, Karen, because I would say, let's go on a trip. And she'd say, okay, well, did we do boing, 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 boing? And what are we going to do with the dog? And, you know, and
I don't know.
who's
Just
making the
get in the car, right?
reservations? That's Karen, you know. So the answer is yeah. So yeah, to sort of summarize it, there's probably, if I say there's what's the superpower, I'd say learning the word no. Um, through my earlier part of my life, meaning high school, I was always trying to fit in, trying to figure out a way to fit in, trying to work around, trying to fit in, trying to do stuff that I couldn't do, um, because I wanted to please people. And I realized after a while that when people asked me to do things that I knew weren't right, or I didn't fit into who I was, or I couldn't see a purpose for them, I learned to say no. You know, and I had bosses who would come to me and say to me, "You are the biggest PIA in my, but you get the job done and you care about kids." And that's really what know who you are, know where you're working, where you're going to. And always, I mean, that journaling stuff was wonderful, because what it taught me to do was think about what I did today and think about what I need to do tomorrow. um, and that's a lot of it is when you're, whether you're divergent in one way or you're divergent in another way, as long as you have some kind of roadmap, and you don't move off of that roadmap, meaning not, I'm not talking about being inflexible. I'm talking about understanding that you might have to go to Pittsburgh. You might have to go to Miami, and somebody else will go directly to Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
But while you're going to Miami, you're also stopping and learning about Cajun food,
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's all a matter of how do you get there and where do you go. And a lot of kids, unfortunately, walk away feeling that they're failures or that there's something wrong with them when actually there's something wrong with the system that's there. And so they need to learn those skills of saying no, realizing who I am, and also realizing that they have something to add to the picture. If they don't feel like they have something to add to the picture, they do all the stuff. I worked in a crisis intervention line for a number of years. And a lot of those people, when you would talk to them on the phone, or we'd go out as a team to meet with them, they didn't see any solutions. They saw no, because nobody had ever helped them to figure out that there are solutions. All they heard was learn from your failures. Well, guess what? If you're an average, I have 4 kids, and some of them, they would figure out. I always describe my oldest daughter, Andrea. She'd take a test, and if she didn't get 100 on it, and she got a 98, first thing she would say is, what's going on with the 2 points I didn't get, and what do I need to learn? My youngest daughter has a learning disability. She would say, "Uh-oh, I failed again."
Yeah.
Because when you fail a lot, you don't learn from your failures.
No, you can't.
If you fail 1 or 2 times, then you say, okay, this is how I change it. So the biggest trick, like we spend a lot of time teaching Erica that guess what? There are other solutions, and you are not a failure. You're a success in your own right. She is right. She's an adult and she's done quite well. But so that's the other thing we need to walk away with kids who are divergent learners or thinkers is it's okay to be different. It's okay to say no. It's okay as long as you know where you're going. Don't say no just for the sake of saying no. Say no if it doesn't fit into where you need to go.
Yeah.
And where you yourself think you need to be. And if that doesn't happen, it hurts them. It hurts the people around them, and they don't walk away from it winning. They walk away from it losing.
I think, a role that parents and professionals really have for these folks is to help them find their spot, find what it is that works for them, and have them really capitalize on that. So I really appreciate you spending this time with me. I think I say this every single time that I do a podcast. The time always goes incredibly fast. But I really appreciate you taking the time to share your journey with us. I think it's a good example of the fact that things don't always quite go in the line that folks thought that they should have. I think that we need to reproduce that elementary school program that you went to, because it sounds pretty effective. I'm very grateful for you taking the time to spend with us. So,
well, thank you it's always a joy talking to you, Laura.
Always.
Yeah, when we do a lot of talking. So, yeah.
So, all right. Well, thank you, and
thank you,
and thank your daughters for the fact that you've now dropped their names into the podcast. Hopefully they'll be all right with that.
I don't think they're used to it.
Okay.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.
All right.
Are we good? Thank you for listening to Universally Unique, exploring the neurodiverse world of the extraordinary. Join me, Dr. Lori, on Transformation Talk Radio every second and fourth Monday at 11:30 Pacific Time as we continue to explore navigating a world not designed for diversity. For advocacy and support for individuals with disabilities, let's connect. Learn more about consulting and life coaching at notoholisticconsulting.com.